fairly obvious what it is. And that's a plaque on the wall right near the site where you can go and tourists can go in Hanoi. They seemed to ignore us when we were there. Didn't seem to pay much attention to us. We were not, at least in this area, an oddity, although we saw no other tourists that came to this area. Are you surprised that they would keep something like this? Would we do the same thing here?
I don't think we would, but I think at least for a period of time they wanted to have those visible symbols of their victory. Particularly, you know, this picture is kind of interesting. Look at how terrible those conditions are. And the problem in Vietnam today, as you know, is that they've made these enormous sacrifices, and yet nothing has come of it. And that's a bitter, bitter pill for the people of Vietnam to swallow.
Why do you think they've not been able to do better?
Their system. As you know, their system of socialism, of central government control of the economy, etc. And as we may get into later on, or at least at some other program, the economy of Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, but everybody calls it Saigon, is much more thriving, as you know, because there is capitalism and free enterprise. And now even in North Vietnam, it's improving a little bit because they have loosened the controls. But their system is such, like any other socialist country, quote, communist country, they can't improve unless they allow the free enterprise system to function. And as you know, the people that still run North Vietnam are the old Ho Chi Minh 70s, 80-year-old generation, who though even they recognize they've got to change.
You said that you were mistreated.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is that endemic to the South Vietnamese people? I mean, the Vietnamese people, not the South Vietnamese, North Vietnamese people, or what?
The Vietnamese viewed us, understandably, as an enemy. They viewed us as, they called us air pirates. We had bombed their cities, towns, etc. And they believed that, and I understand why they believe that. As you know, they're very naive people, and I understand why they would dislike us, and I would understand even why they would mistreat a captured pilot to get military information. The resentment that I hold towards the Vietnamese, at least those individuals, was when they attempted, as they did for years, to exploit us for propaganda reasons. That's not, it's not in keeping with the Geneva Conventions, and frankly, they were trying to use us as an extension of the battlefield because they knew very well that militarily they would never prevail, but they could prevail, as Ho Chi Minh said, in the streets of Washington, D.C., Detroit, Chicago, and San Francisco. So most of the mistreatment was to make tapes, to confess crimes, et cetera, et cetera.
You're Senator John S. McCain III?
Yes, yes.
This is a leading question because I know you knew your father because when I was in the Navy, he was the first admiral I ever met when I was in the basic class at Little Creek in Virginia going into the Navy. He was John S. McCain Jr. Who was he, and what role did he play in this war with you? You in it over in prison.
Both my father and grandfather were Navy admirals. In fact, it's my information they're the first father and son who were both four-star admirals in the Navy. My grandfather was an early naval aviator and was the commander of the carriers in the Pacific under Admiral Halsey in World War II. My father was a submarine officer during World War II and was promoted and was the commander-in-chief in the Pacific during the Vietnam War, during the time that I was in prison, which was, as you can understand, a very difficult period for him. Much more difficult, in my view, on him than it was on me.
And what year did he die?
He died in 1980.
Did he see you elected to the United States Senate?
He did not.
Did he know you were going to run?
No, he did not.
And before, you said you spent, what, 21, 22 years in the Navy?
Yes.
You got out at what rank?
As a captain.
And
yes.
What was your last job in the Navy?
I was the Navy liaison officer to the Senate.
Have anything to do with getting you interested in being one of them?
Yes, exactly. It did. It made me very interested in political life, not because I found that particularly attractive, but it's certainly when I saw what a person can achieve as a member of Congress, it became very attractive to me.
Again, if you've just joined us, we're continuing our many-hour special, Vietnam Revisited. Our guest is Senator John S. McCain III. And he is here to talk about his experience, 5.5 years as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War. And we now have some video that will take us, we just drove around what is called, I guess, are they all called Hanoi Hiltons?
You know, the media called them all Hanoi Hilton. We had different names for them. The Plantation was one. The Hilton we knew of was the old French prison, which I think we're going to see later on. And there was another large prison also. But we gave the only one we called the Hilton itself specifically was the old French prison. The one we're driving around now, we called the Plantation.
All right, this is a complete around the block of a prison, that the Plantation that's inside of all this. Does this look familiar to you?
The outside does not, because I never saw it from the outside. Whenever we were taken someplace, we were always blindfolded and handcuffed and taken at night, so I never saw the outside.
When you went back there in 1985 with Walter Cronkite, what was the purpose?
They asked me because it was the 10th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, sort of a review of the whole U.S. involvement, and I must tell you, it was a great thrill for me to spend time with a man like Walter Cronkite, who is an incredible individual. I don't have to tell you how knowledgeable he is and what a fine man he is.
And how long again were you inside this prison?
Well, this particular prison, I was there about two and a half years.
What's your strongest memory of this one?
I think my strongest memory is the heat. When I think about all of the parts of it, it was starting in about March or April. It get very hot in Hanoi, as you noticed when you were there. And our rooms were not ventilated. All of them, the windows and everything were blocked off because they didn't want us to see each other. They kept us isolated. And it used to get incredibly hot in those rooms. And of course, we didn't have any hygiene or anything. We'd get boils, you get dysentery, it would be a very difficult period from then until the rains would start, which would usually be sometime around July or August.
Now, when you went back this time when you went back in '85, did you go back to this prison?
Yes, I did go back to this prison. I tried to go to Wallow prison, the one we're going to see later on, but that's still being used as a prison.
We couldn't get in either.
Yeah, that is a real prison. That, you know, there were stocks on the wooden beds. There were, you know, that was the French. I don't know how the French did architecturally in other ways, but they built a pretty good prison there.
Did you hear much of this noise that we're hearing now when you were inside
Yes.
the prison?
We used to hear a lot of noise outside in the street, yes. And there's also a railroad that runs by next to the prison. I don't know if we're going to see that or not.
Someone said in some article somewhere that they were anxious to go back here so that they could find out what noises they were hearing every day, and they found out that some of them belonged to the vendors of the different products that would come along, and it was it's kind of like their, what's the, the creamsicle people.
Yes, popsicle. Yeah,
you know,
like
the
Good
bells
Humor
are
Man.
ringing.
Yeah. I remember hearing those too.
Yeah.
Yes, the Good Humor Man. And what they did was, when the first Americans were shot down, they kept them all in the old French prison I was talking about, Wallow. Then, as the prison population increased, then they branched out into basically two others. This one that we're about to see, and one other that they kept the pilots in.
How many people were here with you?
In that camp, there was about 50 to 60 people. For some reasons we never understood very well, the Vietnamese would move us around from time to time, and we never understood the rhyme or reason for why they did that.
What'd they feed you?
Generally speaking, it was soup and a piece of bread. 3 kinds of soup, 4 months each, and a piece of bread. Again, in the last year to year and a half, the food improved significantly, again, as part of this change in treatment. And none of us have quite understood, except for a combination of things, including international pressures to treat us better and the efforts of millions of Americans on our behalf.
You were there in 1985. What other time have you been back?
A year ago, last April, yes.
And that would have been April of 1991.
1991, yes.
You are a member of the Select Committee?
On POW MIA affairs, yes.
Are you one that believes there are still MIAs or POWs living in Vietnam?
I assume that there's Americans alive until we have as full accounting as possible. We have still not got that full accounting. But, Brian, I have not yet seen hard evidence that there's Americans alive. And I am somewhat pleased at the progress that has been made in the last 6 months to a year.
What are the politics of it? Who are those most anxious to lift the embargo and those who don't want it lifted?
Business in America is very interested in having the embargo lifted. Those that are opposed to it are those that feel that the Vietnamese have still not been totally forthcoming in their efforts to resolve the MIA-POW issue. I think it is generally agreed that the Vietnamese have complied with our demands that they move forward with a peace process in Cambodia as well as their withdrawal. But I think the MIA POW issue still remains a very significant issue to many, many Americans.
Would you have been elected to the United States Senate had you not gone through all this?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that clearly my service gave me some advantage. At the same time, many, many former military and many former POWs have run for office. I think the American people express their gratitude for past service, but I think most of them elect their elected officials on what they think they're going to do for them in the future. So I think it helped, but I think it helped me, frankly, in being elected to the House. I don't think it had that much effect on my election to the Senate.
Were you in a cell with anyone else in this one we're going to see right now?
I was by myself in this cell.
Could you talk to anyone?
No, but I could tap on the walls, and also the one next door to me, on one side of me was empty, the other side, we developed a method of talking by putting a cup against the wall and wrapping it in a shirt, and we could talk to each other, yes.
Who was next to you?
A guy named Bob Craner, who was now deceased, who was an Air Force major, later colonel. Wonderful, most wonderful man I've ever known. He's the most wonderful guy I've ever known.
They're talking to you on the beeper.
Yeah, exactly.
We got a lot more to talk about. I hope we have some time, because this is being taped for the audience that wonders why you're here over a holiday weekend. Let's look at, it's about 9 minutes and 43 seconds long. You're going to see a gentleman by the name of Pham Wah, who is the head of this is a film studio. He says, and you'll see this, that there was a film studio before and a film studio afterward. He agreed to allow us to go to your prison cell if we would watch a film after it was over. And he wouldn't let us tape the film. Said we had to pay for it. But the film was, I suspect, we did sit and watch the film. It was 30 minutes long, and it was black and white film of probably best way to describe it, of how the Vietnamese have been so helpful in letting Americans come into the country, dig up remains, and try to get to the bottom of this. Would you agree with that basic message?
I think in the last 6 months to a year they have been helpful. Maybe not as helpful as they could be, but much more helpful than they have in the past. And a particular signal event was a setting up of an office in Hanoi staffed by Americans, and allow Americans to go any place in the country and look where they want to. That's been a significant change, but the issue is still not resolved.
By the way, when do you think the embargo will be lifted?
I would think if progress continues in the way that it has, that you could see it sometime after the elections, but I think there's a lot of things that need to be resolved yet, particularly in my POW issue.
Which nationally recognized group is the loudest opposed to it in the veterans groups? Excuse me.
There are various organizations, as you know, some that are more, quote, mainstream, such as the National League of Families, and then there's others that are what were viewed by some as splinter groups. I think those that are the less mainstream are very reluctant. I think the League of Families has a position that they're opposed until there's a full accounting, and they have to have great credibility, and I believe they have great credibility. But there has been, as I say, there's been a great deal of progress. We should thank the Vietnamese for that, although we still have not gotten the full cooperation that we need, particularly in the area, in my view, of Laotian, where the Laos problem is. As you know, there were hundreds who went down in Laos and very few ever returned.
As a way of explanation, when C-SPAN went to Hanoi, we had what we call a minder or handler or a guide, you can call it whatever you want to, provided by the government. His name was Mr. Hung. You'll see him in this video. And we asked the minute we got there if we could go to the prison where Senator McCain was held, and they said, we'll get you there one way or the other. We didn't know quite when we were going to go there. It wasn't a great mystery. But one afternoon, he said it's time to go, and we had plenty of time to do it. What you're going to see is haphazard, ad hoc. We walked in, sat down, visited with the, actually I don't remember the gentleman's rank, but he's in the Army. And our cameraman was Greg Gursky, and we took off into prison 29. And then at the end, and I hope it's with this, you'll hear, I wanted to go up on the corner of the prison just to listen for a while.